Hi, and welcome back to Focal Point AFR Talk. Brian Fisher is my name. The program is Focal Point. The network is AFR Talk, American Family Radio Talk Network, the most dangerous and feared radio network in all of the land. Honored to welcome to our decision maker line Mark Tooley, who's been a guest on this program before. Mark is the president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, and had a column in this morning's American Spectator that caught my eye because it has to do with electoral turnout and all that kind of thing and the impact of religion and faith on the election that we just witnessed. Mark, welcome back to Focal Point with Brian Fisher.
Hey, good to be with you.
Great to have you with us. And again, we've been talking for the bulk of this program today about turnout, about evangelical turnout, how many evangelicals turned out, how many didn't. Went over Scott Trendy's piece earlier in the program about the missing white voters, 7 million of them, just staying home, and got to figure some of those 7 million were people of faith. But Mark, I was just interested in your piece and what you have discovered as you looked at the exit polling, the number of evangelical voters who turned out. I used some of the information from your piece in a column that I wrote today. So tell us about the white evangelical voter turnout this year and how it compared maybe to 2008 with John McCain.
Well, at least compared to other demographics, white evangelicals did turn out sizably in this election. They were, according to exit polls, up to 26% of total voters. By comparison, they were only 23% in 2004, which was considered a high tide year for white evangelicals. And, of course, they voted overwhelmingly for Romney, almost 80%, basically the same percentage by which they voted for George W. Bush in 2004. And that was true for Protestants across the board. So mainline Protestants this time around voted overwhelmingly for Romney, whereas they were more evenly divided between McCain and Obama in 2008. And although Obama did get a bare majority of Roman Catholics this time, he did get strong majorities of both white Catholics and of Catholics who regularly attend church.
Well, and that was something that struck me, Mark, talking here with Mark Tooley, the president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy, the IRD. And Mark, one of the things that struck me, evangelicals tend to be, fairly regular church goers, and that may be reflected in their turnout and their percentage of vote for the more conservative candidate. But I was also struck by what you discovered about just Protestants in general, and you just alluded to it, but I'd like to have you repeat that, just the impact of frequent church involvement, the impact on turnout and their electoral choices.
Well, churchgoers across the board of all denominations voted overwhelmingly for Romney. I'm trying to look for the number now, but it was close to 60 to 40% of churchgoers of all races and all denominations voting for the Republican, and that was true to a lesser extent, but still true in 2008 and certainly true in 2004. So the so-called God gap, which I think is a phrase that originated with the 2004 election, is still very much in force.
And I was looking here, Mark, at the third paragraph here in your column from today. In general, Protestant favored Romney 62 to 37. So Protestants, but the Protestants here would include people that go to mainline churches as well.
That's right.
So they're all factored into there as Protestants, and they favored Romney 62 to 37. But I noticed at the end of that paragraph, weekly Protestant church attenders, their support for Romney goes up from 62-37 to 70-29. So once again, I think that's kind of what I'm driving at. And you saw the same thing with Catholics that attend Mass weekly and how that elevates their support for the more conservative of the two candidates. So it does seem like the more engaged somebody is in their faith community, whether it's even a mainline Protestant church or a Roman Catholic church or an evangelical church, the more engaged they are in their faith community, the more conservatively they tend to vote.
Well, that's right. So Catholics, for example, as you alluded to, voted the weekly Mass-attending Catholics voted by 57% for Romney, and weekly churchgoers across the board of all races and denominations favored Romney by 59 to 39%. And interestingly, the weekly churchgoers in America comprised 42% 23% of this year's electorate, which is the identical number to 2004.
Well, and one thing that might indicate, Mark, we read a number of studies, the Pew study, about how many people are unaffiliated religiously in America. And yet, as you point out, the exit poll shows that about 42% of voters attend church every week. That was kind of an astonishing figure to me. I expected it to be lower.
Well, this was over. There was a big survey from Pew, as you'll recall, a couple months ago, showing this 20% figure of religiously unaffiliated in America, a record number. But that same study showed that regular church attendance in America remains at the same number where it's been for 80 years now, which is about 40%.
You know, one thing this would indicate, and this is the last question I'll ask you, Mark, before I let you go. I just very much appreciated the work that you did in this piece. But, we're looking here at your figures. Evangelicals supported Romney 79-21. Weekly Protestant church attenders favored Romney 70-29. Weekly attenders at Mass favored Romney 57-42. White Catholics 59-40. And so I guess the bottom line, and this is what I'd like to have you comment on as we close our conversation, seems to me that, the takeaway for me, Mark, from your piece was that if we want to take this country back, evangelism is the key. That's the key, not just to spiritual renewal and moral renewal, but also to political renewal, because the more active people get spiritually pursuing God, the more likely they are to vote for people who are going to defend our values in the public arena.
Well, that's the key to everything, isn't it? Chief of all, of course, spreading the gospel and perpetuating the truth and the health of the church. But the side effects, obviously, are the health of the nation. And as we see in this election, the more often you went to church, the more you were concerned about sanctity of life, defense of marriage, religious liberty, and that affected how you voted. And the less often you went to church, the less of concern those issues were to you, which is predictable, but we need to remember that.
It was interesting to me, too, going back to that Pew poll just for one last comment, when they talked about the religiously unaffiliated, maybe you mentioned this, I forget if you mentioned this, but the less religiously affiliated people were, the less inclined they were to vote. In other words, that 15 or 20% that not affiliated with any kind of faith tradition, they've just sort of checked out of engagement in public policy and public life pretty much altogether.
Yeah, supposedly 20% are religiously unaffiliated, according to that Pew poll, but in the exit poll, only 12% of voters were religiously unaffiliated. So it makes sense if you're religiously apathetic, you're less motivated to be civic-minded and to vote.
Our guest has been Mark Tooley, who is the president of the Institute on Religion and Democracy. And Mark, thanks for coming back on the program, and we'll look forward to having you on again.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. God bless you, Mark. Mark Tooley, Institute on Religion and Democracy. Again, and the point here, ladies and gentlemen, is very simple. The point here is very simple. The key to reclaiming America is evangelism. It's not political activism. It's evangelism. It's discipleship. It is mentoring. It's getting our friends and family members involved in an active faith community pursuing God. They do that. They pursue God. They seek to satisfy that hunger and thirst they have for righteousness. They are going to become involved politically, and they are going to vote for conservative candidates. So we need to be done with this business that we can kind of separate out spiritual life from everything else. It's the key. It's the key to political renewal in America. Let me repeat, spiritual renewal is the key to political renewal in America. If we want to reclaim this nation, the answer is very clear. It is through evangelism. It's through sharing our faith. It's through discipling and mentoring folks. It's getting them involved in an active faith community. You get people connected to God, they're going to start caring about their culture. Again, you get people connected to God, they're going to start caring about their culture. They are going to become more engaged, more involved, more informed, and much more likely to vote. So again, that's the takeaway. Key to reclaiming America is not political activism. It is spiritual renewal. You get them spiritually renewed, the activism is going to come. Well, let's see if we can grab a couple of sound bites here as we come to the break. Let's go back to clip number 1 here. This is Congressman Jim Jordan talking about some of the weaknesses that we had in this past election because of the candidate that the Republican Party chose to run as their nominee. Let's listen.
Here was a guy who actually passed a a health care proposal in Massachusetts, similar to what President Obama passed, which the voters obviously don't like. Here's a guy who has waffled on the life position over his career. And so, and here's a guy who, some people had doubts whether he was as really strong and committed to opposing tax increases and limiting spending. So I think in hindsight, you look at that, and it's like, here was a guy who was the most liberal nominee in history for our party, and that has an impact on motivating people to come out and vote. And so I think that hurt us in the long run.
So Jim Jordan saying, look, you can't ignore the fact that this was the most liberal candidate that the Republicans have ever run for the presidency, and that had to have an effect on turnout. Evangelicals staying home, 7 million white voters staying home, and the fact we had the candidate we did had something to do with that. Now, Charles Krauthammer, this is clip number 2, he's doing his post-mortem on the election, and I really strongly, I think Charles Krauthammer is a really smart fella. He's a really sharp guy. I read most of what he writes. We use his sound bites a lot on this program because he's a shrewd guy, but I think he is absolutely flatly dead wrong on this. Let's listen.
There's one exception here, which I think is Hispanics, and that is not an intrinsic ethnic affinity problem. It's a policy problem. The Republicans Romney ran to the right of Rick Perry in the primaries. On that issue, he never recovered. I think Republicans can change their position, be a lot more open to actual amnesty with enforcement, amnesty everything short of citizenship, and to make a bold change in their policy. Enforcement, and then immediately after, a guarantee of amnesty. That would change everything. If you had a Rubio arguing that, it would completely upend all the ethnic alignment.
I don't even know what amnesty with enforcement means. I mean, that's gobbledygook to me. Amnesty is no enforcement. Amnesty is y'all come. I mean, what is amnesty with enforcement? Charles, I mean, I got no idea even what you're talking about. And I got a lot of respect for you, but you lost me on that one. Now, here's Martin Bashir. Let's grab clip 3. Martin Bashir, host on MSNBC. Charles Krauthammer is a paraplegic. Guy gets around in a wheelchair and a handicapped accessible van. And this is what Martin Bashir, a compassionate liberal, had to say about having Charles Krauthammer, a video clip of Charles Krauthammer, on his program.
Now, I need to apologize to any young viewers who may have been frightened by that face.
Can you imagine that? Can you believe that? You know, Jan Bryan, my co-producer, was saying when she saw Christopher Reeve in an event, he reminded her of Charles Krauthammer because the disability has an effect on your features. Martin Bashir making fun of it. Focal Point AFR Talk.